Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writing the Rapids, the Mike Kleine episode. I'm your host, Joe Bielecki, and this month, like I said, I talked to Mike Kleine. Dude is fascinating. He does video games, he does novels, he does plays. We talk about projects he has upcoming. We didn't even touch his music, really, at all, except in passing, which is something I regret. In fact, there's a lot of things that going into the conversation I wanted to talk to him about, but I just spent so much time listening to him because he has such an interesting way of looking at things that I really didn't even need to steer the conversation. I just sort of wound him up and let him go, and it was awesome. It was a wonderful experience just to sit here and listen to him talk. Before I get into the interview, I want to let you know that the Patreon page for Writing the Rapids is up and running right now. There's a bunch of good rewards, there's some cool goals. The more gas you put in the tank, the farther the car will go. So if that's something that you want to do, have the means to do, that is something I encourage you to do. If not, no worries, the show's always going to be here. I'm going to do it till I drop dead because I love it. So let's get into the interview right now. Patreon.com/WTR. The first thing I want to know is how you would classify your work. And I have the question because I was reading an old interview with yours right around the time Canley Stubrick came out, and people were talking about your connection to Bizarro fiction, but you at the time didn't seem to feel that connected. At least didn't feel like your writing was necessarily Bizarro.
Yeah, that's a good question. I answer it bluntly. I would say that my writing is just, I would say that in the broadest sense possible. And even right now, to this day, I still would not categorize it as Bizarro, because there are only a few Bizarro imprints. I think there's maybe 3 or 4 of them, and I would leave the label to those imprints and almost say that if you are not releasing through any of those 4 imprints, do not call your work Bizarro, because they've worked very hard to get to the point where they are, and they actually just won an award. I forget which award it was, but it was with some horror. It was a pretty big deal, and I don't think they would have a problem with people associating their own work as Bizarro without being on one of those imprints, but with the knowledge that I take people and leave it to them. So then, yeah, in that sense, since it's kind of hard to explain my writing to even people I work with, I just always say it's fiction first and foremost. And then once we get into specifics of anything, that's when I start revealing what it actually really is about without trying to confuse the listener.
I gotcha. But okay. If I held a gun to your head and I said you have to come up with a sub-genre title for it, what would you call it?
If I had to, I would say it's perhaps high concept, because I'll focus on that, and that's what I will try to. So, for instance, Mastodon form, I would say, if I had to use as few words as possible, I would say it's about celebrity culture. That's the first book. The second one, Here at That Mountain, I would say it's about religion. And then Canley Stubrick, the third book, I would say is about love. So I'm able to pick something very specific, and even though it may not always be immediately apparent as you begin reading the work, if you remember that word or words that I use to describe the work as you're reading it, it manifests itself. So I would say that, I mean, it sounds like I'm reducing it to just that word or those words, but yeah, I would say it's high concept literature, because it's never, Harry meets, Amanda, and they fall in love, and this is their story growing up or, living somewhere else. It's always there's always more than that going on, and the characters that I create, I feel, don't always necessarily represent human characters. Um, they have they may have a set of values or a set of characteristics that resemble humans, but they don't necessarily always mean that they're human characters. And that's something that I like to have happen with the work. And I also like to hear people's interpretation of certain things I do, because there's a certain vague quality to my work that's there on purpose, because I don't want to bash into your head, this is how it needs to be, this is how you must see it. Because I really do appreciate the idea that every single person who ever reads anything has a different background and a different set of understandings, and I want to learn from that as well. So I always enjoy having discussions about anything I've written that somebody has read, and they have reacted either strongly to it, or they've wanted to ask a question just to see what I was thinking when I wrote it, and then usually from there, the discussion we have um, sort of influences or inform.
Oh heck. Are you still there?
Yes, yes, I'm still there.
Okay, your mic cut out after you said the word informs.
Informs. Any discussion that we have about my work usually influences or informs anything else that I do moving forward.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that makes sense. That's high concept is not a term that I think about, and I don't know why. Uh, because it makes so much sense to hear you explain it. Uh, maybe I'm just caught up in this weird, like, post genre hell of everything needs to be, um, like, post modernism with a sort of visceral surreal bent to it. Back in the day, I used to do a music podcast, and I was always trying to find like a sub genre. So it was like deep post metalcore wave, and like what is that? There's like two bands that have ever released anything that could be considered that. There's that website everynoise.com that is constantly being updated and is mapped out algorithmically. Yeah. So maybe that's just kind of where my brain has been stuck in.
Well, I mean, everything you're saying makes sense, and I am familiar with that website. I guess my aversion to labeling what I write is also out of, it's not an anger, but it's just a realization that when you label anything, if you label something you've done or something you like as a certain thing, everybody has a different understanding of that. So when you said, post whatever, my understanding of that I might think that's cool, whereas somebody standing next to you might be wondering, I don't know what that is, and I never want to know what that is, so I never will take the opportunity to find out what that is. So I've discovered, or I guess, quote unquote, my own adventures talking to people. It's easier when you just reduce it to the most basic and vague term possible. Oh, this is going back to just saying fiction, because then I think it encourages people to discover what that is. And usually after the fact, they come back and say, oh, that's not what I expected at all. And that's either usually a good or bad thing. But from a marketing standpoint, they always at least check it. Well, not always, but 9 times out of 10, they're more with I just jumped in and specifically said exactly what each thing was, because it might turn off a lot of people. And also, I mean, time is a valuable thing, and a lot of people are not going to invest time into something that doesn't even interest them a little bit, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally understand that. That sort of brings me into another thing that I noticed. At least the only books of yours that I've read are Canley Stubrick and Our Fat Mountain. But I noticed with surprise, and my wife can attest to this, when I opened the package, I saw how small Canley Stubrick was, and made a note about that. And is that something you think about when you think about book length?
Yeah. You mean like the actual just number of pages?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So, I this is also me thinking for the reader. I realize that a lot of people these days probably don't want to sit down and read 1,000 pages from a writer that no one has ever heard of, or has not really, done anything substantial with their writing. Not that that's a bad or good thing, But I also sometimes describe my books as, books for people who don't necessarily like to read because you finish them in an afternoon if you wanted to. And people that I know in real life who have read my books who are not familiar with anything I've done have usually come back saying, "Oh, that was pleasant," in the fact that they were able to read it very quickly, whether they liked it or not. And usually my drafts are about 3 or 4 times the length of the final book. I know that my very first one, Mastodon Farm, was about 300 pages long, and it went through a series of revisions as far as the perspective goes. Same thing with Arafat Mountain. It's about, I would say, twice as long, and I have reduced a lot. What I do is I just write a certain way because I want to do that, and then I go back to it and after something just sort of manifests itself and I see it in a different light. And usually that's from after coming back to the work maybe months later. And then within a short amount of time, I'm able to, figure out exactly what I want to do with it. But yeah, I do keep in mind the length. I think the longest work I've done up to this point was Arafat Mountain. But next month I have Lonely Men Club coming out, which is going to be about 720 pages, it looks like right now. So that's going to be the longest one, but that also was done with that length in mind.
Okay. Lonely Men Club is, I think, the thing that I discovered you through. I think I discovered Inside the Castle because of that digital residency that they were doing, and then came back to it trying to figure out who had won and found out that you won, and from there started researching your work. So I'm really interested to know what that process of writing that book was like because of the parameters.
Yeah. Let me see here. Oh, and also I forgot to say thank you for also reading Arafat Mountain and Canley Stewart. I appreciate that.
Oh, of course. No, I love them. They're great books.
Thank you. Yeah, no, so for the last, I would say 18 months, I got bored with writing because every single time I write something new, I want to, and everyone says this, and I believe it. I try to do something different because I don't want to get in this habit of just doing the same thing over and over again. And I looking back at all three of my books and that play that I wrote, The Mystery of the 17 Pilot Fish, I can honestly say that I feel that I did something different with each one of them, and I don't regret any of them. But I got to a point where I didn't know where to go next. So I would look around. I don't like submitting to journals or online websites for short stories or anything like that because um, I don't know. I don't really feel like I get anything from that, and I don't really know what I'm trying to get out of what I do with the books other than having conversations with people. But I just feel like this day and age, I'd rather write a short novel than to write a short story because I feel that when I write short stories, the only people reading those are the other people who submitted to that website. Not that there's anything wrong with that,
Mm-hmm.
but then I don't think there's any dialogue that usually stems from that. You might just get like a congratulations or hey, here's a Twitter post. I like this story, but then nothing other than that really ever happens for me. And I'd rather go with the dialogue that comes from writing a longer work because then people usually have more questions. And also the physical act of holding something in your hand, I really enjoy as well. But to answer your question about Lonely Men Club, I was looking for something next to do. And I stumbled across Inside the Castle. I had heard of Inside the Castle maybe a year ago because M. Kitchell had released a book called Hour of the Wolf on there, which I was already familiar with. He had released that on his imprint Solar Luxuriance. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, M.
No.
Kitchell.
Nope.
No, okay. He's a very interesting person who I've never actually met in real life. We've interacted on the internet a few times, but he's really good friends with Jared Kobeck, who is with We Heard You Like Books, and that's the imprint that Canley Stewart came out on.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to hear more about him after I met Jared in real life. We've hung out a few times since then, and I just really like the direction that M. Kitchell goes, and he writes his own stuff. He designs his own book covers. He takes photos that are really interesting to look at. But anyway, yeah. So that's how I kept Inside the Castle in the back of my mind. At that point, they did not have that residency for the Castle Freak, but I just made a note to always check out whatever was coming out next. So, I mean, books were coming out, and I liked the idea of each of them. But then suddenly there was this post, I think it was on Twitter, where Inside the Castle said, "Hey, there's this thing called Castle Freak Residency if you're interested." So I was like, "Oh, maybe this is the next thing that I'll do." So I clicked on it, and every single thing about the residency goes against anything I've ever done. You're supposed to write this work that's 100,000 words long. I think that the average length of my books is maybe anywhere from from 12,000 to 20,000 words. You're supposed to have a computer help you write the words. I like to be in control of everything I write. I don't like this randomness to anything. There were a ton of other parameters, but I said, you know what, I'm going to try this, and whether I fail or not, that's part of the product. You're almost destined to have something regardless. So I spent about 3 weeks writing my proposition, which essentially was going to be that I'm going to use this program called Twine. I'm not. I don't think a lot of people are familiar with Twine, and even people who are familiar with Twine, you wouldn't use or associate Twine to what I did. And all it is, it's a program that was designed by one person to write basically interactive fiction on the computer. So you say, X person is in a room, you go left, you go right. So you can click on left, you click on right, and then it takes you to the next sequence. That's nice, but I realized a lot of people are doing that, and it's that market itself is oversaturated with the same thing. So there's this interesting feature in Twine where you can actually have one sentence, and then you can put as many different permutations in that sentence, and it'll always be a random sentence. So I can say I'm going to eat the apple pie, but then the word apple can be changed into cherry or lemon meringue or key lime, and you can do that as many times as you want for any word. So essentially, that's what I did. I came up with about, I think, 300 or 400 prompts for Lonely Men Club, and within those prompts, which are also just sentences, I would change maybe 7 or 10 words in that sentence. So I got to a point where I was running these tests, and I would run the same sentence over and over for about 300 or 400 turns, and I would only get a repeat of maybe just 1 or 2 words after three or 400 times of running that sentence. So that's when I got to a point where I decided this is what I want to do. So essentially, in a simple way, Lonely Men Club is about the Zodiac Killer, which I've been fascinated with for years. He or she, whatever, the Zodiac Killer actually featured in Bear Fat Mountain, if you remember. But I decided to, and I've always wanted to dedicate an entire book to just the Zodiac Killer, whether it would be through research or speculative fiction or just fiction or a fake biography. I didn't care. So in this sense, Lonely Men Club is going to be almost a journal of the musings and inner thoughts of the Zodiac Killer as the Zodiac Killer carries on living from 1968 all the way up to 2018. I was originally going to divide each section by years, but I decided not to do that because the idea of the work was for you to be able to open it up anywhere and read it from any place on the page and continue and stop wherever you want. But essentially, yeah, it's just this this really messed up way of looking at the the diary or there's this thing called pillow books where people have dreams and they wake up and write down what their dreams are. It's almost a mishmash of that as well. But I really just want it to be whatever people want it to be for themselves. And I think the length is going to allow that to happen because I doubt very many people are going to read it all the way through. I already have 2 or 3 people that have read it all the way through. They've told me what they think, which is very interesting. But this was a challenge in the purest sense of the word. And I didn't enjoy all of it, but now that I'm hearing back from people, after having been invested in it for so long, it's actually pleasant to hear what they are getting from it because that's exactly what I wanted to hear.
Good. I remember seeing some of the screenshots of pages, and I think that's a good format based on what I know of the Zodiac. How his whole deal was being cryptic and whatnot.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. You bring up a good point. I always skim over that because I talked to John, who runs Inside the Castle, and he mentioned how he's talked to other people, and whenever they actually see parts of the book, they um, it's always a surprise to them, which I think is a good thing now because I actually wrote this essay, I think 8 pages long, that we're going to be printing soon here, and it's supposed to come out right before the book is released, which sort of explains my process and sort of because up to this point, no one really knows what it's going to be about or what it is because we haven't really talked about that to anyone, and we want it to be a surprise. But the essay is going to give more insight on how I created the book and why I did it the way I did. Um, I don't know if I can say where that's going to come out yet because I haven't gotten the green light, but it is going to be coming out this month, and it's going to be good as far as shedding light on the whole project. I mean, I'm very excited for that. But yes, there are a lot of visual elements in the book. I would say it's probably 40% visuals and 60% text. And I do believe there is no repetition in the book, but if there is, it's unintentional. But then a lot of the visual stuff also happened by way of the process because I didn't stay up for 5 days straight, but I was sleeping less than I usually do, which isn't very much anyway. But I was doing things I would never normally do if I had, gotten 8 hours of sleep every night, because I had to do all this in 5 days. And I was also using a program that I'm not very familiar with. I was using Microsoft Publisher, which I thought would be similar to using InDesign, but it's not the same. So there were a lot of restrictions that sort of um, guided me to do certain things that I normally would not have done on my own. And I think that the restriction of being on a deadline caused certain creative elements to manifest themselves. But yes, people who have seen the book so far always make comments on the visuals because that really surprises them because there really is no mention of that, and you don't really expect that hearing about the book or seeing even just the cover, which no one has seen the cover yet except for John, and we still are working on 2 or 3 different designs, which I'm actually the cover, but I have these 3 different. I don't know which one to go with. He likes all 3 of them, so I'm also excited to hear what people think or see the reaction when the cover comes out because the cover is also not going to be what is expected for this type of work.
Awesome. That's super exciting. I was excited anyway, and now I'm more excited. And I'm googling
Thank you.
around here. I do somebody an old friend of mine or something recommended I use Twine. Uh, I had a small errant desire to try to do simple game design, and they suggested Twine as sort of a way to help go about doing that. So
Oh, absolutely.
you're not completely alone. Do you want to talk about your game design at all? Because that's another thing I find really interesting. The way that you tell your stories through games.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Essentially, I did research last year to. I've always wanted to try game design. I mean, I've been trying to do it for years, but when you're given so many liberty, you could essentially be working on the same thing forever, and no one will ever see it. Which for me is one of the scariest things. I don't like the idea of keeping all this work, whether it's music or audio or writing or anything, and just having no one ever see it. For some people that works, but I mean, for me, like again, like I said, my biggest thing is just having a dialogue going on, regardless of the dialogue. So for game design, the first, I was trying to find a list of the easiest programs to use to really just get into it because I wanted to just create quick things, just get them done and see what happens. The first one I found was Twine. Twine is really this one. I can't recommend that enough for any person who wants to tell a story, whether it's a writer or a video game developer who is having issues with their current program, because you could make something in literally 2 minutes. Twine was the first one. I made a bunch of things just for myself, oddly enough, just to see if they would work out. And then I spent about a year working on the one Twine game that I have out on Always Crashing, um, because that one came to. I had a game that one was maybe 5 minutes the length of where it is now, and I tested it with I think 10 different people who had read my previous works and were very interested in whatever I was doing next. So I emailed them the link to the game and gave them and I said just read it and play it several times. Let me know what you think. And it was positive for all of them. None of them had any issues they wanted me to make. So that's when I decided, hey, this is done. So I submitted it to Always Crashing, and it's on the website right now. And you can play the game. And it's just this thing where I think there's 6 different mini stories, and every single time you play it, it changes a lot. Or it's constantly rotating and changing, and the story is never the same. That was the first program. The most recent one that I discovered is one called Bitsy, Bitsy. And what that is, it's similar in Twine as far as how it strips out a lot of elements from game design. You literally have, I think, 64 tiles that you can design on, and each tile can be an object or a character or a background. And then when you move, it's not a fluid movement. It's like 1 frame per second, and it's kind of like those those old Spectrum ZX games. And when you're designing a character or a tile or a background, you are limited to these little pixels, and you can't. I mean, you can't really make them look like anything detailed. But some of the more interesting games out there, what they do is they take several different boxes or pixels and make it look into one big thing. Which, I mean, right now may not make sense, but try using Bitsy. It becomes impressive seeing what other people are able to do. But anyway, with Bitsy, what you do is there's also an element of randomness that you can assign in that engine, which is what I always gravitate toward. So I can have a character walk up to another character, and every single time you can walk up and ask or say something, or the character will say something to you, and if you walk away and come back, every single time it'll say he or she or it will say something different to you, and that's what fascinates me because I like this idea that if somebody is playing, I know that there will be one person out there who will keep going back to that same point or characters to see how many different characters or say until they run out and you realize it's a game. And I try to not have that happen. No matter how small the character is in the game, how small of a part they have, I always try to make it seem as if they're a real character, which wastes a lot of my time because most people aren't even going to care about that. I watched someone on YouTube, posted a video on YouTube playing one of the games I made recently, and a lot of the stuff they would walk by, and in my mind, I was going, no, go back and try that, or run into that thing again. It's going to be different. But it makes me realize that what a lot of people do, which is fine. But yeah, I've made 3 games with Bitsy. I did all of those within a 2 or 3 week period. So I recommend Bitsy a lot as well. If you want to move away from just text and you are willing to design some graphics, you don't have to be an artist. It's just literally pixels. Anyone can do that. So that's Bitsy. And then RPG Maker, which everyone is familiar with, I bought 3 weeks ago. I wanted to do something with it, but then I realized very quickly that it's a little too limiting and it focuses too much on the fighting, which I don't care about. So I moved away from that, and right now the engine that I'm using is an engine called Adventure Game Studio, which is it's a guy from England who designed it. It's free, and it's literally what it sounds like. It's those old point-and-click adventure games from the 90s and 80s, and those were some of my favorite games. The tedious thing about this is you literally do have to design your art from scratch. There really is nothing to, like with RPG Maker, you can have these preset sprites or graphics, but with Adventure Game Studio, you literally are just given this tool, and you have to make your own characters and your own graphics, which is very satisfying because once you get in this routine, you discover what you want to do. It becomes very fulfilling, but there's also a huge curve for people who don't do art. So yeah, at the moment, I'm trying to make this adventure game that isn't really going to be an adventure game. But again, there's also an element of randomness in this engine that you can appropriate to characters and what they say. And that's really what I'm focused on right now. It's pretty much 80%. I want to focus on the dialogue and the atmosphere, and 20%, the story and the character. I just want to get this one element to be exactly where I want it to be, and then the game will sort of manifest itself from there. And then if that becomes a success, then I'm just going to move on to a different engine until I eventually get to 3D graphics. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. I don't know if I'm going to be writing anything after this, but I'm focusing more on the game side because the game aspect, you also get a lot of dialogue immediately. As soon as you release something, people will reach out to you more quickly than a book because people are willing to, set aside 20 minutes for a game as opposed to an hour or 2 for a book.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever watch the YouTube show Mostly Walking?
You know what? That's funny. Since I'm watching all these old adventure game videos, I saw that show up in the recommended videos, but I did not click on it.
Okay. They have some pretty good analysis. Usually, they're all game people. I think they all have master's degrees in various forms of game design. It's hosted
Oh
by
wow.
Day9, who was a pro StarCraft Brood War player for a long time.
Okay.
And he does a bunch of stuff, but it's interesting to watch them sort of fumble around with adventure games and get frustrated with the way that 90s adventure game puzzles are designed.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's one of the draws, yeah, because there's I think there's a list of the top 10 most ridiculous adventure game puzzles, and that's what fascinates me as well. You know.
Yeah, that it's almost like they designed the game the way a discovery writer will write, which
Yeah.
is okay. Makes sense to have him pick up a stick here, and then 4 weeks into designing the story later, man, he's still got this stick. I need to have him do something with a stick. I guess we'll have him pick a lock with the stick. I know he has a key as well, but the stick is actually going to be because we just need to get that out of his inventory.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. The thing is, another thing of those games is you literally click an item in the inventory, and you just click it with everything else, and then one of them will do something. And I don't know if I want to do that because I think it'd be funny to have a game that is unplayable where you have to use a strategy guide because the top 10 games from the 90s that were the best adventure games, King's Quest, 8 or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or Gabriel Knight 2, you had to have a strategy guide at some point because some of those have the most ridiculous puzzles that do not make any sense logically. And that was part of the appeal because certain people, if they could figure it out, thought they were geniuses. Others would just go into the game knowing that half an hour in, after they've appreciated the graphics and the sound or whatever, they would have to pull out that strategy guide. And I think that I might want to hone in on that because I do like the absurdity of it. I can't think of another genre within gaming that has sort of allowed that to happen where the players have accepted it as part of the actual game.
Yeah, I think the initial reason for doing that was as a form of piracy protection because
Oh yeah.
because if you need the strategy guide, you're less likely to just torrent the the game file from somewhere or steal the floppy disk from a store or buy it at a garage sale because you know that you need to have bought the box and get all the feelies that come with it.
Well, and that's true because I mean there was a game. There are actually several games when I was growing up that my dad had bought. And there are these old DOS games, and they came with these codes where whenever you load up the game or you go to a different level, it asks you, match up A with F and R and P, and then if you, it's these little radial things that you turn, and as you turn it, it reveals the code that you're supposed to type into the computer. And yeah, back then this is before. I mean, the internet was happening, but you had to go on these forums or Usenet, they were called, USENET, and then you would have to ask someone, or someone would have to have had that and taken the time to type in every single possible code that there is available for that to happen. I mean, nowadays people can just do that digitally, but yeah, no, you're right. All these games, especially the company Infogrames from England, it might have been the U.S. It was, I don't remember, but they were big into that. You bought the game and you didn't just get a game. I mean, you'd have like 4 or 5 floppy disks that it came with, but then you would also get this code book. You would get the manual. You get a storybook. You would get this a miniature of the character from the game. You'd get a map. It was a heavy box every single time. And I remember these were when manuals were maybe 400 pages long.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember there was a game growing up. I can't remember anything about the game except that we got stuck pretty early on, but it had a cardboard magnifying glass with red, like a red gel that you would hold up to the screen, and it would sort of decrypt barcodes that would appear on the screen.
Yeah, it
And
sounds about right. Yeah.
I really like those ideas that you make the media tangible and real.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You don't get that anymore.
Yeah, I talked about House of Leaves. I think on the last episode, but I really like the idea that you have to physically turn the book 90 degrees to read some of the footnotes that are in there, and so the book becomes an object that is necessary to the experience of consuming the story.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean you're gonna get a lot of that in Lonely Men Club as well. John mentioned that how, yeah, we want Lonely Men Club to become this object that I don't think we're gonna be able to make it a Kindle or even an audiobook. It'll be impossible. So yeah, the idea is that the only way to experience this is you have to have it in your hands, and then after that, however you experience it entirely.
Yeah, I that's one of the things that always prevents me from thinking about submitting to Inside the Castle is John's constant book as object, or a book that knows it's a book. It's really intimidating.
It is, and I mean he's pretty much he's actually gone on record, so on Twitter, where he responds to these prompts that certain people throw out, and he like gives the complete opposite. So it's like, one prompt might say, "Hey, design a book in completely using Comic Sans," and then he'll say, maybe design a book where the font is illegible. You know what you're writing, but no one can ever read it, and then release it on black paper, and the ink is black as well, and there's no way to read it. But then release 800 pages of that. And it's not that he's going against like what is considered normal. I think that he likes to say things and do things that make you think of something else, and then from there, something new arises. Because so I met him in person 2 months ago, and we just sat there and talked. Actually, we walked around and talked because he's an architect, so he's really big into looking at buildings, architecture, and I'm just fascinated, but I know nothing about any of that. So we walked around for 6 hours, and I would just point at a building, talk about it for 5 minutes, and then I would ask other questions, and then we would talk about literature somehow in the middle of all that, and then he would say something that I've never heard before, and I would say something that he's never heard before, and then we would just go into this conversation that we both of us didn't sort of expect, and that's what I really enjoyed about talking to him, because I could definitely see who that Inside the Castle came from, this type of person, and you can tell that he spent a long time thinking about what he wanted Inside the Castle to be before he even did it. And this whole Twitter and internet thing is new to him because he would just do it. He would do writing and reading of material on his own without going on the internet. But he's realized that now you sort of have to have an online presence to have people, know about what you're doing. But other than that, everything else he does is pretty unorthodox, and I mean I'm all for it. And I would say that Inside the Castle is no longer in the early stages of its existence. It's exiting that beginning stage. It's getting to that middle point now where there's a large enough repertoire of authors that you can sort of get a sense of the body of work. There's still a lot of great stuff coming out after next month that I'm really excited for because I've seen some of it. And also just the ideas that he has, and he's told me who he's talked to that might be publishing next year, and all these people that are approaching Inside the Castle now because they are realizing what it's trying to do. And I do get what you're saying when you say it's intimidating because it is very different from what anybody else is doing. I truly do think that. But I also think that that's what the appeal is, and that's what's challenging people to do what they wouldn't normally do, such as myself. I know there are a couple authors on the press that have always been doing what always the castle's kind of after, which is why, or inside the castle, sorry, not always, which is why it was so easy for them to just naturally create something for inside the castle. But I would say the rest of the group have never done anything like what they have on the press, and John just has this way of easing you into that because I 3 times during the writing of after no actually after I had written Lonely Men Club, and he was looking at it and we were laying it out. I on 3 separate occasions I just got up and said, no, I can't, I don't want this anymore, let's cancel it. And then he would have to talk me back into it for a long time. It would take days sometimes where he would explain to me why he thinks this mistake should stay in there because that's how it was supposed to be, or how this typo was part of the process and it shows that what I did is really what I did and it wasn't some artificial method, or I didn't make it like I wanted to. It organically manifested itself. And I mean, I don't know how he does it, but he convinced me on several separate occasions not to cancel the project because I was really apprehensive because I'm all about the control, and literally Lonely Men Club was about losing control and then grabbing all that, putting it in a jar, and showing everyone what it meant to lose control and come back from that.
Wow.
That's what it was like talking to him.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, at least for me, I have no concept of like a writing community, nor really a desire to find one. But it's always a really strange feeling when you happen upon somebody in this writing world that gets it beyond the way that you thought you got it. Like, let me, if I can rephrase, like, you meet a person, you're like, oh man, you get it, like you and I are on the same wavelength. But then it's interesting to meet a person who's like two or three delineations beyond that wavelength that you're on.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, for me, it's most of the conversations I have that have to do with writing are online or in writing, so I never actually say any of it out loud. So when I'm actually talking to someone about it, like right now, even though we're not meeting in real life, I get excited in a way where I'm not. I don't. I hope I'm not coming off as like, oh, I'm really excited. I can talk about this forever. But it's just that it's all these ideas that I never say out loud. And as I'm seeing them, they make me realize other things that I've wanted to always talk about and just see what the other person is going to say. But no, I know what you mean about you're on this certain wavelength and you feel like they're 3 or 4 delineations or steps away from you. And every single person I've met in real life that's published something I've written, I felt that way because, and that's why I published it because for for me, there has to be a certain level of they get it more than I do. That's why I'm letting them handle the rest of it. So yeah, with John, he's on this different level that I don't think I'll ever understand, but he is able to hone that and speak to all these different people and get on their level and then go back to his level. And then there's Jarrett Kovac with We Heard You Like Books. It's a complete different conversation, but every single time I meet him, it's in LA. We go to this place called House of Pies. It's his favorite place. I think he goes every day of the week. And we last time I met him at I think it was 1 p.m. and I left at 9 p.m. And we just sit there and talk about. There's no basis of conversation. We just meet, we hug, and then he's like, "Hey, how do you like the weather?" And I'll say, "It's great. It's sunny." And then just boom, 9 hours later, we're still talking, and one of us has to go to another meeting because it's late. But it's this organic discussion where we will say something, and you talk to a regular person, they have no idea what you're talking about, but then he or she will say, "Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. How about this? Do you know about this?" And then it just progresses from there. And then the other person that I met was Tyler Crumrine, who runs Plays Inverse. He published my play, and he is on a completely different planet when it comes to plays because that's what he does. I can't pronounce this word. He's a dramaturge. It's drama, and then I think it's Turge. And what he does is he researches the accuracy of how people speak. So if they're doing a play that's set in 1954 and they're using certain accents, he researches that and makes sure that every single character is pronouncing the P correctly or the I correctly. And also, if something is presented a certain way visually, that's exactly how it would have been done back then, whether it's how they did plays back then or how people actually lived. So that's his life. So in talking to him, when he was taking care of, researching for my play and also publishing it, I just saw this passion and this involvement that I've never seen from anyone when it comes to a certain thing that you're able to say in words. Usually, if someone is really passionate about something or really involved, you can see it, but you just don't understand it. He was able to explain to me what he does and also how he was able to apply it to my work in a way that I understood it that went beyond what I expected from him. And I think he was more invested in what I wrote than I even was at a certain point. So I just literally just let him do the rest. And the fourth person is Anderson Prunty. I think I'm pronouncing his last name right, Prunty. I've never actually met him or talked on the phone to him, but he published my first 2 books, Mastodon Farm and Arafat Mountain. The reason I trusted him is because he was actually affiliated to the Bizarro scene. He's one of the first writers. I think since he hasn't left the scene, but he started his own press called Atlatl Press, and I think he's written about 30 books since then, and I admire a person who can write that many books and have still keep their voice in all those books. And he goes from any genre, and he still knocks it out of the park. He goes from horror to thrillers to bizarro to absurd literature to action, and he's done everything, and it's all amazing. I've read almost every single thing he's ever released, and I mean, you can tell that he's also on a different wavelength because he doesn't interact with people very much. He just sort of writes. He doesn't talk about writing, and then all of a sudden something just comes out of nowhere. He just releases a book, and then it's usually 200 or 300 pages long, and I read it, and I'm just it's amazing. He has a way of just, and he creates these real stories of these characters. It's more like I could totally see every single book he's ever written become a movie. They're not weird just for the sake of being weird. It's this person who can actually write very good stories, but then he just has a way of doing his stories. But yeah, that was just a quick run through of all the people that I've published with and why. I mean, it's very important who I publish with, which is how it should be for anybody. But who I publish with, what the cover looks like, what the cover is made of, those are my three things usually. And up to this point, I think that I've hit all of them. I mean, I guess we'll still see with Lonely Men Club because that hasn't happened yet. But it's just this sequence of things that I need to check off the list when I'm working with somebody else. And all four of these people that I worked with so far have been able to do that. And I would recommend anyone who wants to work in literature and has something that they would like to release, and they should familiarize themselves with these presses. Maybe you can put links later, but all four of these people I would vouch for forever.
It seems like a lot of the oh heck, how do I want to say it? It seems like obsession has to be at the root of these people. Like obsession with one sort of thing. Like your playwright publisher. Like that to me, like the obsessiveness to go and figure out exactly how certain consonants need to be pronounced is speaks to me as a display of obsession. And I'm wondering, do you have sort of that obsessive nature about you about anything?
Yeah, I mean, you picked up right on it. Yeah, every single one of them that I was talking about, there is something obsessive about them, which is what makes it great. It might seem weird to other people, but I think that's what makes it interesting. For myself, yeah, there's this element of control that I need to have in my work, and I do this, and I did this in all of them except for Stanley Kubrick, and I think it shows up in Lonely Men Club. But it's these lists. I have to make a list, and when I make a list of something, it's very, very long. So the play, The Mystery of the 17 Pilotfish, opens with a scene where a man walks into a house, and the house is painted blue, so it looks like the ocean, but it's not a real ocean. But then there's a bunch of fish on the floor, and those fish are actually all real fish. And I spend, I think, 2 pages or 2.5 pages just listing all the fish there on the floor. And it's a very, very long list. And my obsession with that comes from the research of looking up. I didn't know anything about fish before I wrote that play, so I spent 2 months just watching videos on different fish, finding out why certain fish are called what they're called, why they do what they do, what's interesting about each fish. So if you ever do read the play, believe it or not, each fish that's on that floor is there for a reason, and there's also a number associated to each fish, and there's a reason for that number as well. So that's where my obsession comes in, because it's things just like in the video games that I'm making, where a minor character will say as many things as an important character, but nobody will care or know about that. I still have to do it for myself because I want to know that if somebody ever were to look into that, they would see the work that I put into that. So it's this idea that it only takes one time to fail, so you got to make sure that you cover all your bases no matter what. And for me, my obsession just can come from anything. I mean, a good example is like this phase where I go through phases where 2 years ago I bought this keyboard, a Prophet 08 that I've wanted for years. I finally bought it, and then I just spent 3 months, literally every single night. I would be up from 8 p.m. to maybe 3 a.m. just recording just songs. And I wouldn't use a computer. I refused to use a computer, so I bought this 4-track, and I would just record in one take. And to this day, I think I have like maybe 70 songs that I just haven't done anything with, but I needed to do it because I had to justify the purchase of this item that was very expensive that I still have. I did that, and then after 4 months, I didn't walk away because I got bored. It's because I found something else that I was obsessed with. So then now this video game thing started about a month ago, and that's all I do. So when I come back, now I focus on, okay, now I want to do this thing, or I want to add this thing to the game, or I want to do this thing. And who knows how long that's going to last. I'm guessing it's just going to last a couple more weeks or maybe a month or two, and then I'll go do something else. But I would like to find one thing that I just do. That's it. I don't want to do anything else, because I'll write film reviews for a while, and then I won't do them again. So I think I wrote 9 or 10 really in-depth film reviews in March. Now I don't do it anymore because I don't have time. And then for the whole month of February, I was recording myself playing guitar or bass, and I'd record video, and I would just post a video of it on Facebook, just one a day or one a week, just for the whole month. And I don't do that anymore. Maybe it's things that I find to pass the time. I think that no matter what I do, I will always come back to writing in some sense. And right now, my schedule has been every 2 years I release something. Since 2012, I've been doing that. It hasn't felt burdensome, or it hasn't hindered me in any way. But I think it's time to do it differently. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but I think that the Lonely Men Club is a good beginning for this new change, because I'm redoing something completely different. Because I have had people that have read my other work that have been waiting for the next book. I mean, and I make it sound like there's a lot of people. It's maybe 20 people that have asked me over the last couple of months since they found out about Lonely Men Club. Hey, what is this? When is it coming out? I'm very interested. And they're going to be very surprised at Lonely Men Club, which I'm very excited to hear what they think about that, because these are the same people who usually write reviews. So I know I'm going to know what they think. But at the same time, it's also going to be very alien to new people, and I'm also excited to see what that does. And also just people who are curious in general. They're like, "Oh, I didn't know something like this was even being done these days." I just want to hear from those people as well. And then I think whatever happens after the Man Club, I'm gonna sit down and just take it all in and decide what I'm going to do next. I mean, there are other things that we can talk about later that I've sort of started, but yeah, the focus right now is just literally I took a 180, did something completely different. It's done. And now I just want to sort of see what reception is going to be, because yeah, that was going back to your question about obsessive. I mean, that was the epitome of all that, because everything that's in there. I said I had 500 different sentences that I came up with, and those didn't happen overnight. I had 5 days to do it, so I spent maybe a day and a half. That's all I did. Where I could have been doing more useful things to make the story progress or write other things, but I just spent a day and a half just writing these different sentences, and each one had to be very specific about what it was doing. For example, one of them is Zodiac looks at the sun, and the sun is a certain color, but the color is a normal color like purple, green, or red. But then before that, there's a word that's associated with that color. So like destroyed, or I can't even think of the words right now. There's like 90 different words I used. It's destroyed or impossible, or diseased purple. And this I got from E.E. Cummings, because he would invent these words just by taking two words that don't mean anything and putting them together. And one would be italicized and the other wouldn't, so that you could find the separation. And this is more like a poetic gesture. And I don't really understand poetry as much or as well as I'd like to, but that fascinated me. So I literally bought all the books I could find on E.E. Cummings, and I would read all the poetry he's ever written. And he's an interesting person. And what fascinated me the most was that someone back then was doing something like that, because I could totally see someone now, a contemporary poet, writing something like that, because it makes sense. I mean, you're informed by Tumblr or Twitter or whatever, all these short bursts of just inventing whatever you want. But back then, someone who was, you were being taught how to write literature or poetry in a conventional sense, but he was going against that, and even just the way it looked on paper, he was fascinated with writing making poetry look like poetry as opposed to just having it go in sequence. So that I was very fortunate to find out about him right before Lonely Men Club. So anyone who's familiar, and I do cite him as an influence in there too. Anyone who's familiar with him will see a lot of that in Lonely Men Club, because that really goes hand in hand with that the idea of creating these sentences that randomize and become different things. That's where I just got into this zone of this is what I want. And there's another sentence where Zodiac drinks tea. So I had like 100 different tea that he's drinking, he, she, or it. And then there's also different lakes that Zodiac goes to, and the methods of transportation that Zodiac takes to go to these lakes. And then Zodiac goes to the library to check out either a VHS, a laser disc, a Betamax, or a tape of a certain film. And there's a list of like 150 films. And then there's different music that Zodiac listens to, and there's different concerts that Zodiac goes to. So it's all these mundane activities that a normal person, if they were to do them, you would think I don't really care. But if you keep in mind who the Zodiac is and the way I'm just presenting the Zodiac in this light that nobody would ever think of, I think that's what makes it unique. And that's where the obsession came in, because I wanted this to stand apart, strip away the method of how I created the story, strip away the idea behind the Castle Freak. And if you were to take all that away, would the story still be interesting? And that was the question I was trying to ask, and I think I answered it.
Yeah, that's a good question to ask too, because that keeps the work from becoming a gimmick that people rave about when it comes out because of the shock value or something. And then it's a work that can live on its own long after people have forgotten how it was conceived.
Correct. Yeah, and that was the biggest thing. When I was talking to John about that. That was one of my issues. Hey, I don't want this to be a one-trick pony type thing. I want this to move beyond all these fears that I have. And he had read. He actually hasn't read the work all the way through. He's seen parts of it, but he's done that on purpose. He wants to experience it for the first time as a book as well. That's why he's had other people read it, and they were the ones who mentioned if there's any issues with it. But yeah, as I was thinking about writing it, there's one writer in particular that I kept going back to, who I mentioned in the essay that I wrote. His name is Edouard Levy. He's a French writer. He wrote a series of books. One of them is called Auto Portrait. Are you familiar with him?
I'm not, no.
He wrote this book where literally, I think it's 110 pages of him just literally saying everything that comes to mind. Where he says, I've never swam in this lake," and he says, "I've never eaten this type of sandwich. I've never watched this type of movie. I have only kissed 14 people in my life. I have never gone to the store to buy candy." So it's these really weird things that anyone could do, but it's how you can tell that he wrote it, and it was a longer piece of work, but he kept the best parts of it. And once you read it, you could literally read it all in one afternoon. It's that good. He also wrote this other book called Suicide, which unfortunately he wrote right before he actually killed himself. But it's the story of him and his friend standing outside about to go play tennis, and his friend says, "Hey, just hold on, I have to go grab something I forgot in the house." And it's a true story. His friend went back in the house and shot himself. So then he spends the rest of that book writing from the second person, explaining what their life could have killed him if his friend had not killed himself. And it's this atmosphere that he creates with this story that you don't get anywhere else. Then he has this other one called Works, where he has all these ideas for books or projects that he wanted to start that he never started, but the ideas themselves are enough to like create a whole book. Where he has these random things where he says 4 people are staying in a room, but one of them is not something. How do these other 3 people find this out? And it's literally just these prompts. And the whole book is just full of these prompts. Another person that really influenced Lonely Man Club is David Markson, who wrote This Is Not a Novel, The Last Novel, where literally all these books are just a bunch of sayings or facts from history, where he'll say Caesar never actually ate a Caesar salad or something strange like that. But what was fascinating about those books is people said he hasn't written any of these. All he's doing is going through a encyclopedia or something and finding all these facts and then just writing them down and then putting them in a book. And he said, yeah, that's what he does. He would write all these things on note cards, and then he put them in a shoebox, and then he would just like throw them on the floor, and then just pick the ones that he found most interesting, and then he would write a sequence of those and make a book out of them. And there's 7 or 8 other authors who were doing very weird things, and I cite them all in the essay. But I was trying to find this sort of middle ground with all, like I wanted to have 10 authors that I could not necessarily emulate, but say that these are the ones who sort of gave me a direction or a sense of direction into what I wanted to do with Lonely Men Club. And I hope that people who are familiar with at least one of these authors can pick up on that. If not, I guess they'll think that I came up with all that. But I mean, there is a certain quality that comes from combining all that I didn't see in any of the other works. But I mean, just like anything else, when you're making something, you take your favorite of anything and you just try to do something better with it, or you try to make it your own thing.
Do you find that numbers are important to you in your creative process? It seems like, just from listening to you talk now, finding the 10 writers and or doing a thing for just a month, do you sort of partition things in your mind like that purposefully? And is that part of the like control that you've referenced as well?
I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up because I have talked about numbers a lot. No, I think that the only reason I do that is because if I do not stop myself with a number, if I don't say, all right, by end of April, if nothing comes from this video game phase, I will stop. If I don't do that, I will go forever.
Okay.
So it's a way to limit myself. Because I could just focus on something forever, even if nothing comes from it. I think also this, I told you earlier that every 2 years I have to release something. I think that stems from my parents because growing up, their biggest thing is if you're doing something, you have to have something to show for it. You can't just do things for no reason. So I got in this habit of when I do something, like when I would do homework, I would have to show them, hey, I finished my homework. And then the proof of finishing my homework, they would let me go do what I want. I could go play a computer game. I could. It was never. You can't just. There was no verbal agreement. I could never say I did it. They would always say you have to show me what you said you did. So I think that became ingrained in me. So that's why when I say something, I don't announce a lot of things to the general public, such as Twitter, unless I know it's going to happen. So usually, if I'm done with something and I'm editing it or I'm revising it, it's pretty much done. That's when I announce it, because I guess a pet peeve of mine, again, because of my parents, is if someone says they're going to do something and it's 3 years later and you ask them and they still say, oh, I'm still working on it, I'm not done. I just get annoyed by that because what I'm used to is you say something and then you do it shortly after. And if they don't, it just confuses me, but also angers me in a not angry way. So yeah, the sequence of limitations definitely comes from my parents, and I just stuck with that because I guess I've seen results from that, and it definitely has limited me in certain ways, but also shaped me a lot in how I do things. And I did not realize that until right now.
Well, there we go. That
Yeah.
would be $150 for the therapy. I think that's really interesting. Do you think you could do something episodic then?
You mean for games or books or
For
anything?
anything creatively?
That's a good question. If I did that, I would have to think about it differently, because I would either approach it one of two ways. I'd have to know what I'm going to be doing for the first 3 episodes, no matter what. Maybe with a little deviation, but I would have to know that. Or literally, I would just go into it and just do the first one and go off whatever and do the second and third one. It would be interesting. But for me, the only thing that would make it happen is if there was a demand for it. I would not go into a project. Let's take writing for instance. I would not go into a project, write a first book, submit it to a publisher, and say, "Hey, by the way, this is book 1 of 5," because who knows what's going to happen? I mean, what if I die 2 weeks from now? I mean, I don't want to do that kind of stuff. But if somebody approaches me and like how I told you, those publishers, all 4 of them, when I spoke to them, they had this something about them convinced me to do what I did. If somebody of that caliber can approach me and explain to me why they think I should use something episodic, absolutely, I'm not against that. But for myself, it would take a lot of self-convincing to even think about doing that.
Okay. That's a good answer. I guess the reason I ask is because one of my personal obsessions lately has been researching all of these different like ARG type YouTube series that happened right around the time that YouTube was new, and the idea that take for example Everyman Hybrid, that series, how it like still is kind of happening 8 years after its inception. And I guess ARGs are a whole different monster too. But it,
What is ARG
okay,
actually?
alternate reality games. Um,
Oh, okay.
so let's see, for a good example, a good easy example. I guess we'll take Everyman Hybrid. It's sort of it's part of the Slender Man, or it uses the Slender Man lore, and it was a YouTube series, and oh, there's weird things in the background of these YouTube videos, and so people will comment on them, and it sort of expanded out from there, and it's like, oh, the Slender Man is actually haunting them, and Twitter accounts and Tumblr accounts would sort of branch off, and treasure hunts would happen. People would be sent coordinates, and they would actually go to the coordinates, and then they would dig up a box, and the box would have things in it.
Oh, wow.
And so they would post those things on Twitter, and all of this sort of ragtag community would say, okay, well, that code, that jumble of letters is this type of cipher, and I've decrypted it, so it's this saying, and so on and so forth. And so,
Is this real, or who was putting these boxes there?
well, so that's the thing, is that it's just like with Everyman Hybrid, it's 3 or 4 guys who just like decided to do this. And the thing that is so fascinating about it is, as I watch these like Everyman Hybrid explained YouTube videos, is it seems like they had everything planned out from the start, which is crazy to me because it's 8 years old at this point.
Right, right.
Um, and so I guess my episodic question was sort of stemmed from that idea. Like, could you do something open ended and not let it impede you expressing yourself other artistic ways?
Uh, now that you bring it up, now that you know explain it that way, I guess my fear would be to be stuck in something that I no longer enjoy doing. Even if it became popular, like these guys, the Everything Hybrid or Everyman Hybrid, and it was 8 years later, and I got sick of it 2 years in, but I felt like I had to do it for the audience. That would be my. I would hate to do that, and I would not. I wouldn't have the guts to tell everyone I hate this. I can't do it. I would just keep doing it, but I would not like it. So it'd be a fear of being stuck in something you don't like. But at the same time, on the flip side, my other fear would be to keep trying to do this thing, and in the back of my mind thinking, oh, it'll pick up, it'll pick up. Just keep going, keep going. It's 4 years in, 5 years in, and all you're getting are these 5 people who are just, you only have 5 people who are interested. You get like these maybe 1 or 2 stragglers, but then they just leave. And I'm thinking more of the YouTube type of thing you were talking about. I mean, for the writing, you could almost say that that's what it's at for me at this point. It's not. I mean, there's no huge fan base. I mean, there's a steady one there, which kind of is what keeps me going. But the nice thing is I can kind of do something different each time. But I don't know. Now that you bring that up, maybe I'm gonna write that down, and 2 years from now, I'm gonna try to approach. I mean, the closest thing to that is I had mentioned that there's these other projects I'm working on. There's this graphic novel that I've already written all of it. This was recent and it's done. And I have this artist working with me. His name is Tor Brandt, Tor space Brandt. And I got in a phase where I was reading a lot of graphic novels. I've always liked reading them more when I was a kid, but now that there's a lot that you can actually read as an adult, it's geared towards adults. I appreciate that. So there's like a 6 month phase where I was reading different graphic novels, and I would make notes on why I liked the way a certain one looked and why this one affected me, blah blah blah. So I made this list of like, again, here we go with numbers. A list of like, I think it was 6 things that I liked that I wanted. Like if I were to do something, this is what I wanted in it. But I don't. It's not that I don't trust my own artistic skill. I could draw something, I guess, but it would take me longer since I don't do it on a regular basis. But I wanted to find somebody else that I really enjoyed their style for more than one reason. At least, 3 or 4 of those 6 reasons I had. So I spent a long time looking. And there was this guy, Tor Brandt, whose stuff I did for 3 years ago that I had kept as a bookmark. And one day I just randomly saw his stuff again. And he had done so much more since the last time I had looked at his website, and his style had improved, and it was exactly what I was looking for. So I just contacted him and said, "Hey, look, I have this story that I think would really go well with your style. Would you be interested?" And I didn't think he would respond because he had gotten to a point where I think he was getting the recognition he was looking for, so he was busy with all these projects. But he said, "Yeah, just send me, your script or whatever." And he really liked it. He said there was a quality to it, like the way I was writing. It felt like there was a detachment, as if there was a floating narrator that was telling the story, even though each characters was talking. But it's the way they talk that was interesting. So anyway, we're talking about obsession. We started this, I think, a year and a half ago, and we have gone through 7 visual changes as far as the work goes. We did a whole layout. It's going to be about 200 pages long, where he drew every single page as sketches, and we agreed on how it was going to look. And then he started doing the first 3 chapters, but then he would change his mind and say, "No, instead of doing this with pencil, I'm going to do it with a graphic tablet." And then he would do that. He's like, "No, it's too clean. I'm going to do a mixture of both." And he would start all over. And then he'd stop that and say, "No, I'd rather do this color palette." But instead of just, doing it digitally, he would start all over again. And then he'd say, "No, I want to use crayons for this," or "No, I want to use colored pencils. Oh, these colored pencils, that shade of green is not that good. I'll switch to a different one." So he'd buy a whole new set of colors. Um, so most recently, he redid everything again. I mean, I don't mind, but he apologized every time. He's like, "I'm really particular about how I want things to look." I'm like, "No, I completely get it. I'm the same way, just not to that extent, because with writing, you can just press delete and rewrite that sentence. But with drawing, there's so much more involved." But um, right now, it's going to be called Life Itself. It's going to be spelled Lief, and then itself is going to be spelled Itslef. And literally, all it is it's these 2 guys called Akbar and Kud. Kud is spelled Qud. They're life coaches. They travel the world telling people how they should live their lives, but then you discover as the story progresses that they don't really have a handle on their own lives. One of them goes missing. The story cuts. There's an 18-month period where it cuts after the person goes missing. There's even a sequence in the book that says, "Please take 2 weeks off before you read the next sequence."
Wow.
And then when the sequence, yeah, once the sequence picks up, the character shows up again, but there's no explanation of what happened or where he went or why he left, and they just carry on as if nothing happened. But then as the story reaches the end, you realize, oh, I think I know why, where he went and what happened and how they found him again. Um, and then I did this thing that I've always wanted to do with my writing that I don't think I was able to do unless it was a visual novel, which is going to happen here. But this doesn't ruin anything. At the very end, I mean, actually, the last section, every single character that's appeared in the story, and we've done a list. I think there's about 95 characters. They all come back at the very end, and there's a reason they all come back, and every single one of them has their own panel. And this is arguably going to take the longest time. But if it goes the way we planned it, I think it's going to be very. It's going to be something that people can actually talk about, because there's a reason we do it the way we do it, or we chose to do it. And if, like I said, if it goes the way planned, I'm really excited to see this visually, and I want to know what people think about it. But there's no rush on this. We don't have a deadline, which may be part of the problem. It's more of a passion thing, but he's really passionate about this as much as I am. And it's something I haven't talked about a lot about because I wanted to show some images about it, but he doesn't want to because we keep changing the style, and he does not want to show anything until we have half of it done, which I understand completely.
Yeah, for sure. I keep just getting caught up um listening to you talk, and I have a copy of Camley Stubrick just in front of me, just in case I wanted to reference it, and I probably won't.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well, I talk too much.
no,
Go ahead and stop me.
no, I would. I I'd like listening to people talk about writing, which is why this show exists. Because something about reading people talking about writing, or people writing about writing, really just like rubs me in a strange way. It doesn't upset
Hmm.
me or anything. It just, I guess it feels too tedious to read. Um, like any sort of tangential anything in an essay about writing, I just want to skip. Uh, and I know Stephen King has his sort of his big popular on writing book, and I don't know if I'll ever read it because I just remember somebody talking about it and saying that his quote unquote rules for writing is that, at least for himself, is he reads 4 to 6 hours a day and makes sure that he writes 2,000 words a day, and he won't go to bed unless those two things have been completed. And like that's really all I need from Stephen King about writing.
Yeah.
But if I were to listen to him talk, and his voice is super abrasive, so maybe it would be different. But I could probably just put on a lecture of his on YouTube and play some tower defense game or something, and just let it go and not be bothered at all.
Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. And that totally makes sense. Beca- I don't know how to even put it in words, but yeah, reading about writing is very different from hearing someone. It goes back to what I was saying. You know, uh, most of the talk I do about writing, whether it's my own or anybody else's, is done on online or on the computer or in writing. But then when you actually say it out loud, or you're talking to somebody else, especially someone who gets it, it's a whole different way of interacting. And in a weird way, I think that that lack of interacting verbally or audibly on a regular basis, I think, is what makes it so interesting. I mean, imagine if you had your show every single day. I think it would get, maybe some people would enjoy that, but I think it's the idea of having it, having a break between each of those. That's it gives some people something to look forward to, if that makes sense.
I do think so. There's a guy at work who, at one of my jobs, who's a writer, and every time I walk by his desk to talk to him, it always turns into at least a 45-minute discussion because
Yeah.
he comes from such a different background that I do, and so we'll just throw names at each other of writers or critics or whoever, and there's like the Venn diagram is two circles very far apart. And it's great because it's like it's constantly I'm constantly learning and writing names down in my phone, and because of that, there are days where I see him at his desk and I will very purposefully not make eye contact with him and try to avoid talking to him because I know that like I really enjoy talking to him once a week or once every other week about this, and taking 45 minutes to an hour and a half out of my day to talk to him about it. Um,
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, there's lots to say for that. I mean, that goes for anything other than writing. I think that some of the more interesting conversations I've had in life are with people who are completely different and have completely different interests, but we're both willing to listen to each other. That's the biggest part. And there's some people who are completely different who refuse to listen or have a conversation, and that's a whole different interaction. But yeah, for the people that are willing to write down the names and actually look up what you're talking about, and then you do. I mean, there's a valuable conversation to have there, and that's essentially what I always want to have. So yeah, I mean, this interaction you have with this guy sounds great, but at the same time, I do understand the not wanting to do it every single day, just like I had mentioned about your show. You have to have this distance, you have to have this break, this gap, or else it no longer it's no longer a pleasant thing.
I agree. However, the Patreon that is now live does have a
Yes.
$10,000 a month level where I will do the show every day. And for $10,000 a month, I'll
Oh,
tell
there you
you
go.
what, man, I'll do the show every day and I'll smile every day. I'll wake up a very happy man every morning.
I like that goal, $10,000.
Because it's absolutely unreachable. Absolutely unreachable. That's like Red Letter Media Patreon money. That's just, I do not have a 90-minute Phantom Menace movie review quality work inside of me. At least not with this show.
Well, I mean, this is the early stages. You never know what's going to happen in 6 months.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I think what I was trying to
Keep your
get at.
fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think one of the things I wanted to get at, and I was talking to my wife about it because I think the last half of Canley Stubrick I read out loud to her as she was falling asleep. That's something that she likes me to do every once in a while. And I was trying to talk about. I find the work to be really special, and I'm not just tooting your horn here. There's something about it. There's an atmosphere to it that feels unlike anything I have felt before, but at the same time it felt very familiar. And with you saying at the beginning of our talk that it's about love, I think that's part of it. Like, it's a love that I've never actually felt before,
Hmm.
but it's still very similar. And that's not to say I have any sort of deficiencies when it comes to being romantic with people, but
Right.
there is just, I don't know, maybe it has to do with the line breaks. Like, it kind of looks like poetry. Maybe it has to do with the black pages dividing up sections, or the length of it, or maybe the the cover art. But I don't know. Like, as soon as I finished it, I wanted to read it again, and that has not been the case with a book since I was a very small child, and all I read were like Harry Potter and Redwall novels.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, whenever people ask me why did you write Stanley Kubrick, what was the drive? I mean, there's two reasons. The personal reason is I had just gotten out of a long relationship, and I had not done anything creative at all during that relationship. So, and I don't want to say how it was. This is not my way of dealing with it. That's not it at all. It was someone to tie it in with that part. Someone once asked me, you write all these books, but why don't you write something that's commercial, something that people might actually want to read? And I said, well, what do you mean? What's something people might want to read? They said, why don't you do something like Nicholas Sparks, write a book about love? And I said, you know what? All right, just because Nicholas Sparks can do it, I can do it too.
Absolutely.
So then yeah, right. So then I started doing that. But I said, you know what? How can I make this my own? So then I started thinking about, like, what does it mean to be in love? What does it mean when someone says that? And I explore a lot. I try to explore a lot of that in Family Stupid. Like, when someone says "I love you," like, what are they actually thinking, and what does it mean to them? Because you say something enough times, and it loses its meaning, which is what Lonely Men Club is all about. But you meet these two characters in Canley Stubrick, and you don't know how long they've been together. You can sort of get a feel of it by the way they talk to each other. But there's also this odd displacement because of their friends they have and the names their friends have. And you wonder like, what kind of people are these people? And I mean, for people who haven't read the book yet, I don't think I'm ruining anything. I sort of already say this on the back, but the girl goes missing. So the guy feels that it's his job to go find her. It's more that he feels it's his job less because he loves her, but more that, oh, we are in a relationship. She is missing. She is my other. I must go find her. And there's just this clinical quality to how he like looks for her. He finds these clues on where to go look for her, and you don't really get much of what he's thinking on the inside. He just follows it. It's like, all right, you go to point A. Oh, she's not here. She's at point B. He goes, okay, I guess I need to rent a car. So he rents a car. Oh, she's not at point B. She's at point C. And all these notes have very strange things on them. A normal person would think, oh, this is very weird. What's going on? Who is this person writing these notes? But he's more like, oh, it's whatever. I guess this is what it's like looking for someone I love. Because he doesn't necessarily know what that means either. Now, this is an abstract way of representing real life things. I mean, I think a lot of my own personal feelings I had after the relationship to maybe wonder, what did it mean when that happened? Or did this mean nothing? Or, when you tell someone, I love you, and then it ends 2 years later, and then they say it to somebody else, does that have less meaning because they said it to me first? All these, deep things that most people want answers to. I just thought, I'll write about it and present it in the way I usually present things. And that's why I think there's something that will resonate with everyone, at least one part or two parts. They'll be like, oh, I think I know what that means. But I don't like to put things bluntly because I do want to hear what people got from what they put. But yeah, a lot of it or all of it really is from personal things. And I spent a long time trying to have every single. I had written down all the things that I wanted answered by the end of the book for myself, which I did answer. But then I wanted them to not just be for me, so I wrote them a different way so that they could be more ambiguous in a non-ambiguous way. And then also the visuals, the way it looks, why it looks like poetry. I had an answer for this a while ago when I first wrote it, which I don't remember anymore, but it had something to do with feeling like I'm taking a deep breath, and I needed to leave those spaces in between the words to show that I was taking a step back and analyzing things, because everything I've written up to that point, the Mastodon Farm is written traditionally where it's paragraphs. Arafat Mountain is just one giant paragraph on each page, so everything was claustrophobic. Here it's like, okay, let's put some air between all of this. Let's distance ourselves. So literally, I was putting myself in the work by showing that I was taking a step back. And I wanted every single word in Canley Stuart, all my work, but mostly Canley Stuart, is important. There was a reason why each word is there. It could have been another word, but I put that word there for a reason. And also just the way I write him is always capitalized. Any man, especially the main character, is always capitalized. The woman, lowercase. There's a reason for that as well. But there's just a lot of thought that went into it. And I could talk about every single page for an hour, but I don't think there's any need to do that because I don't want the reader or readers to know what I was trying to say and have that affect their understanding. I always want people to go into this blind with no expectation or maybe a little expectation based off the back, but then I always want to hear what they got. Like you said, the black pages, the spaces, the way it looks like poetry. I know why I did all that, but I'm always interested in what other people think of why I did that. And then if they want to know why I did it, I will tell them. Yeah.
So you're not like David Lynch in that you're just like, too bad.
I want to be that way, but if I really don't have an answer, I do say I don't have an answer. But no, for Canley Stuart, it was my most personal work. It was one of the things where after Arafat Mountain, I said, I'm not writing anymore. I'm done. This is it. I can't do it anymore. But then the traumatic thing happened in my life, and out of nowhere, this book just came out, and I was like, wow. And it kind of just wrote itself in a weird way, and I would look at it and go, wow, I can't believe that. I had an idea, but then like there are certain pages where it's just 4 or 5 or 6 words on there, and they're all spread out in a certain way. And that's not stuff I do. I don't do and I think that's when the visual started happening, because you'll see a lot more of that in Lonely Men Club. But yeah, before that, I would just stick to traditional, the way fiction looks on paper.
Sure. So is all of the strange formatting in Lonely Men Club, that's not a product of that's not a product of using Twine? That's intentional on your part?
That's intentional, yeah. Twine, it would be able to do that, but if I had to set that up for Twine, where I could literally just copy paste, it would have taken me an extra day to do that. The only aspect of Twine that I used was the sentence, the changing of the sentences. So what I would do is I would have 50 sentences on a page, and then I would just plug them into Twine, and as soon as I loaded Twine, it would randomly generate those sentences from the get-go because I already had it set up that way. And then I would take those sentences and put them on the page and keep going. And then with the visuals, what I would do is I would do it for an hour straight, and then however far I got, I would stop. I would read that whole section, or at least skim through it, and then I would start getting these images or these pictures in my head based on what was going on, and then I would make them look a certain way. So, I mean, for instance, for Lonely Men Club, let me see here. I have it pulled up. Yeah, because if I'm looking at it, there's a part where it looks like the the words are like falling off the side of the page. There's a reason for that because when I was reading a certain part, there's something that mentions that. So I did that. There's other parts where there's a bunch of white gaps between the words. You can tell that there's something white that's like cutting off half of that C, and you can't really read it. There's a reason for all that as well. So there's a lot of visual stuff, but all of it is not random either. I would say that that's the least random part of the book, the visual parts for each section.
Cool. I'm glad that I get to go into reading the book knowing that now. Because
Okay.
because in my mind, I don't know why. For some reason, I just assumed you were doing some sort of algorithmic something, some sort of procedural generation, which I guess is true to a very small extent, maybe. But for some reason, maybe it's because I'm really into, or for some time, I was very into the idea behind the game No Man's Sky.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, for some reason, to me, anything that is machine aided was procedural generation to me. Probably because I know nothing about coding or anything remotely like that. So, I just sort of assumed that the program you were using to assist your writing was placing the words as well as helping you come up with them.
Yeah, there are programs that can do that. I would say that when it comes to programming, I am probably the middle of the beginning levels. I know more than someone who knows nothing, of course, but I don't know as like if I actually talked to a real programmer, they would say, "What are you talking about?" Um, so I looked at different programs. I was looking at Python. I was looking at JavaScript, um, and those programs just did way too much. And I don't like that freedom because I know I would have just sat there and try to do everything. So I needed something I wanted something that I like the idea of taking something that's not supposed to do what I'm making it do. No one would ever use Twine for this programming aspect, and you're not alone when you thought that it was more algorithmic because I've actually had I've had two programmers on Twitter like send private messages saying, "Could you tell me more about how you did what you did? Because I'm very interested in it." And then in the back of my mind, I was thinking, you're not going to find it as interesting as you think it is because you probably think I did way more than it seems. And I think writers that know nothing about programming are going to appreciate the truth more than actual programmers because right now I have both camps. I have all these programmers who follow me going, my goodness, someone actually did something with this, and they're actually going to make a book that might make sense, and it's all programming. And then you have all the writers, such as yourself, who don't know anything about it, but they say, I guess this might be interesting because it seems like he knew what he was doing, and he made the computer do what he wanted to do. Well, it's neither of those. I made the computer do what I wanted to do for what it was writing, but then for the visuals, I had to have some sort of control. So I still took what it wrote, but then I made it look a certain way. I guess I could send you like 3 or 4 pages just to show you what I mean as far as the visuals go,
Sure.
because then it might make more sense. But yeah, there is a reason for all the visuals. They may not be apparent, and they're not always directly linked to the previous or next page, but they're there for a reason. And again, I mean, I could have done way more, but because I'm stupid like that, I spent 20% of my energy making sure that the visuals were there for a reason, where they were, and I mean, some people might call that wasted energy, but at least I know that I did it because I wanted to do it that way.
Yeah. Well, from what I remember about the Castle Freak prompt, there was a time limit, right?
Yeah, you have to do it all in 5 days.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Which sounds like a lot, but yeah, if we were computers and you could literally say, all right, for 60 minutes you have to do this, and then you go to the next. Well, things happen. I had to go to the bathroom. Someone would come at the door. The phone would ring. I'd want to watch a YouTube video for a second. Yeah, I would say then you have to sleep. So 5 days is more like 3 days or 2.5 days if you really boil it down. Interestingly enough, I also recorded, I think, 10 songs during that time because I was just losing my mind at a certain point, and I said, I can't do this. So I would just pick up my guitar, and I would record whatever came to mind, and I'd sing along to it. So I actually have 10 songs that I don't know what I'm going to do with. And they're not. I don't think they're bad. It's just different. It's not what I usually do, but it was just something to keep my mind away. So I would do that, and then I'd come back and keep writing because or whatever I was doing, I would keep generating literature. Because if you do anything for long enough, it loses its. I was able to do it for 6 hours the first day, and then after that, it just became these spurts of 40 minutes, and then I couldn't do it any longer because I was sick of it. I wanted to, break the computer. I would leave the computer on, and it crashed 3 times. But I had it set up where every time I did anything, it would save every 10 seconds. So I didn't lose anything, but it just showed how intense the programming was, or how involved it was, and how many resources it was using, because it was using a lot of the RAM. And I actually did build my own computer, so I knew that it was going to do the best it could do. But even my precautions and me trying to fail-safe this did not stop it from crashing, which was interesting to me because I didn't think it would crash, but it eventually did 3 times. And I think I posted each of those on Twitter. So that was part of the process as well. As a joke, I wanted to put a screenshot of the computer crashing, but I was like, nah, that's too gimmicky. I'm not going to do that.
That was our conversation with Mike Kleine. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And here is him now reading the piece he brought to share with all of you.
Okay. All right. So this piece is called Anhedonia Everything. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But it's the story of this writer called Andre, who has problems feeling anything or feeling any type of feeling. And he's a writer for a music magazine. And he goes to this concert, and for the first time in a long time, he actually begins to feel again. So this is actually the middle part of the piece. So I'm just going to read the middle part. Yeah, that's it. The artist appears around 11:16 p.m. There's smoke and fog and haze and purple lights. The artist begins his set with what Andre would later describe to Sarah as soft and simple music. Just floating organ sounds, scattered with swatches of heavily reverbed pads, almost like a sound check, a lot of it unassuming. Let it be said, Andre is not impressed by any of this. But then it picks up a little bit after a few minutes, and the music itself turns out to be pretty good. Andre realizes that in a live setting, the artist's music is nothing like the iTunes tracks he previewed. The music becomes much more powerful, more immediate, visceral even, almost palpable. The music is loud and enormous. On stage, the artist's setup is minimal. You might never think a table with just a handful of custom synthesizers, an organ, some cassette decks, and a few effects pedals could produce such great sounds. Andre stares hard at the artist. Compared to a more dynamic performance from, like, say, a rock and roll band or even a full orchestra, watching just one guy on a stage for something like 90 minutes, just pushing buttons and turning knobs might feel or seem like an uninteresting activity to the layperson, but to Andre, this was heaven. The cold electronic blips, the distant ambient washes, the high-definition surround sound atmospheric, the languid synthesizer swells, the deep rumblings of the organ, the oversaturated tape hiss, the dripping cavernous echoes, the otherworldly wind chime sounds, the hazy buzzing effects, the hushed murmur and din of unintelligible human voices and side conversations happening at the same time, the waves of static. It didn't matter to Andre anymore what anyone had to say about music. This artist was a prophet. And it was at this point that Andre began to have a moment of higher consciousness. Andre closed his eyes and succumbed to the ambience of it all. He let the sounds transport him to distant places. Andre thought about the universe, his essay that he was writing on another artist, about his interminable desire for recognition, about his love for all things, his passion for deep research, about his failings and all his abandoned projects throughout the years, his broken dreams, his student wounds, his noticeable lisp, his receding hairline, and about everything his boss Martha had said about his work. Andre saw planets, a parallel universe with colors extending far beyond the visual spectrum. A place that should never have existed, where Andre and everyone else was made of metal and archaic circuitry. Images upon images of broken statuettes and floor plans of destroyed museums. Andre saw the beginning of the universe. He heard planets exploding. He witnessed black holes disappearing and then reappearing again. More planets exploding, and then moons, and atmospheres, and rain clouds, and dust storms, and undiscovered pressure systems, and earthquakes, and tsunamis, and interminable warp barriers. Andre tried to open his eyes in an attempt to escape these terrible visions, as he now felt as if he was about to have another panic attack. But all Andre could see when his eyes opened was fire and smoke and clouds and dust and bright lights. And then all of a sudden, almost out of nowhere, bass sounds exited the room. What was left was just pure white static, empty warped cassette tape sounds, and the sound of a foghorn off in the distance, all warbled and masked by sheets and layers of dense pink and white noise, and then nothing else. Andre felt like he couldn't breathe. He grabbed at his face because it hurt so much. But the artist bowed to the crowd. Andre cried.
And that's our episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next month. Until then, if you want to contact the show, it's noisemakerjoe@gmail.com. Put WTR in the subject line. And the Patreon is patreon.com/WTR. Some good stuff in there. All of the contact info for Mike Kleine will be in the show notes. So make sure you check those out because you don't want to miss anything that he has going on. And until next time, write more and write better.